In 1878, a crimson sandstorm rolled out of the high desert and swallowed Dust Valley whole. Daylight vanished under a red gauze, turning the sun into a bleeding coin. The storm moaned through the alleys, and under doors poured dust into coffee cups, and hymnals erased boot prints as fast as men could make them. Wind rattled shutters like dice in a gambler's palm. Horses screamed. Somewhere a church bell stuttered, then fell silent under the weight of grit, and in the middle of that moving wall of dust, a young woman stepped out as if born from it. Hat brim pulled low jaw, set eyes fierce with pride, and yet trembling from the knowledge that fate like weather can turn without warning. She braced herself against the gusts, pressed forward, and vanished again into the rushing red. Years later, Dust Valley remembered that storm the way old men remember a gunshot by the echo. The sand had settled, but its taste lingered in the boards of the saloon, in the seams of coats, in the breath of the town. The sun over the valley wasn't golden. It was merciless, beating the ground until every stone seemed to sizzle. The fronts of the saloons bleached pale as bones. Heat shimmered above the single strip of road that stitched the buildings together. Evelyn Hart walked that road every morning with school books tucked under her arm. Children trailed behind her barefoot brown, kneed their slates clacking softly against their thighs. Dust gathered at the hem of her dress and rose in tiny storms each time she stopped to wait for the smallest ones to catch up. Window shutters tilted as she passed. The town watched her not with generosity, but with a sort of measuring doubt-hungry eyes, wondering how long her eastern backbone would last out here, how long a school could stay open in a place that still measured worth by weight and muscle. Inside the saloon, Silas Crowe leaned with one shoulder against the bar. He was tall, broad through the chest, his black coat hanging off him like a vulture's wing. A revolver rode low on his hip, the handle worn smooth. The man who owned the saloon did not own the room. Silas did by presence alone. He watched Evelyn through the open doors as she passed, watching like a cat watches a bird hop into range. His mouth made the suggestion of a smile, but never the courtesy of finishing it. "That schoolmarm thinks she can tame this place," he told the room at large voice, lazy, the words drifting like smoke. "Dust Valley belongs to me, and so will she." It wasn't a boast, and it wasn't a joke. It was simply how Silas Crowe spoke about things he intended to put his hand on. That afternoon, the air inside the school was a soft shaking of chalk dust, the smell of wood shavings and sun-warmed slates. Evelyn stood before the blackboard and drew careful letters in an unbroken line. The children repeated after her. They leaned forward, eager, as though the alphabet could build a bridge out of this valley plank by plank. The door crashed inward so hard the plaster cracked. Two of Crowe's men swaggered in spurs scraping. They brought with them the smell of whiskey and a swagger that was a poor imitation of their bosses. One hooked a thumb in his belt and looked over the children like they were cattle at auction. "School's over," he said. "Silas needs strong hands down at the stables. These brats'll be cleaning stalls by sundown." The children went stiff. A little girl made an involuntary sound, a breath that nearly became a cry. And then, seeing Evelyn's face, didn't. Evelyn set the chalk down, turned, and stepped between the men and the rows of desks. When she spoke, her voice was calm enough to sound soft. It was not. "They stay," she said. "If your boss wants to argue that, he can come argue it with me." The taller man stepped close, smile sliding toward cruelty. "Lady," he said, "you don't tell Silas no." From the doorway, a metallic scrape. James Carter stood there, canted slightly in the frame, as if a small movement would be enough to set him in motion. Soot streaked his shirt. His hands looked like they could crush iron, because they had. He still held a hammer loose and easy, as if he'd merely stepped away from the forge long enough to say one thing and then return to work. "She just did," James said. His eyes were the only part of him that moved. They were gray and steady, like the underbelly of storm clouds. The room paused to take stock of those eyes, and the two men found their bravado had been measured and come up short. They smirked the smirk of men who had discovered they had miscalculated and didn't enjoy arithmetic after all. They spat on the floorboards to make a point to the children, but the point bent halfway to the ground. "We'll tell him," one muttered, and they went. The little girl, who had nearly cried, picked her slate up with both hands and clutched it as if it were a shield. Evelyn exhaled and heard absurdly that breath make a sound like a prayer. When the last child had gone home and the light fell sideways through the windows, she sat at her desk and laid her hands flat upon it to stop their trembling. A knock on the doorframe made her jump. James didn't step in. He waited like a man at the edge of water, deciding where to wade in. "You stood up to Crowe," he said. "That makes you a target. I won't be bullied," she answered, hating that the words came out hushed. He stepped into lamplight and the shadows climbed his jaw. "Then you'll want someone standing in front of you when they come again," he said. He did not add, "I will." He did not need to. Evening by evening, he found reasons to linger at the schoolhouse. Hinges announced his patience. Desks grew sturdy under his hands. He split wood with the steadiness of a clock ticking and stacked it in a little fort by the door that felt somehow like a line drawn in the dust. Evelyn brewed coffee she could afford and brought him steaming tin mugs. The steam curled upward like secrets might. She spoke first of Boston and of the family farm that felt larger in her mind than it had ever been in reality. She spoke of harvests that weren't big enough and debts that were of the day. She loaded her life into a trunk and boarded a westbound train with what she could carry, and one stubborn certainty that a life could be carved out of this place, even if the carving was hard and the knife dull. He told her less. Of miles and towns, without names, that were worth remembering. Of the way a man can run so far from himself, he emerges on the other side of the same problem. He told her how iron glows when it remembers what it is capable of, and how that is both beautiful and dangerous. He told her that once, when he was young, and the world felt like a string pulled tight, they called him Carter the Quick. He said it without pride, the way a man might list injuries after a fall. Stormlight came down one night, rain smearing the windows white. Evelyn lit a lantern, and the room took on a tender color. James sat across from her as if he were braced for something to hit him, jaw-clenched hands restless on the table. When he finally spoke, the words weren't planned. They simply escaped. "You don't know me," he said. "Not the part of me men used to talk about. They called me Carter the Quick. Men ran when they heard my name. I killed more than I care to count, and I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because I swore I'd lay the gun down when I came here, and I did. I've been trying to keep it down, like a man holds a door shut on a room full of ghosts. But if Crowe keeps pushing," he looked at his hands, "if he keeps pushing, I'll have to become him once more." Evelyn studied him. The lantern hissed, steady as breath. The scars on his knuckles, the pale lines at his temple, the muscle memory in his shoulders, all told a story he didn't want to tell. But none of that was what she saw most. She saw the man who sharpened pencils until they were perfect little arrows for small hands to hold, who moved a beam by himself, rather than ask the old storekeeper to lift what his back couldn't. She saw the way he looked at the children, careful not to let it show how much he enjoyed seeing them try. She saw a man who did not want to be the sum of his worst day. "You're not that man anymore," she said. She put the words down on the table between them, as if they were planks for him to walk across. "You're the man who fixes things when nobody asks you to, who carries weight because it needs carrying. That's who I see." For the first time since he had come to Dust Valley, James Carter let his shoulders fall from their guarded height. He reached across the table slow, as if the air had weight. Her hand met his halfway. Outside, lightning unstitched the dark. Inside, they built something that did not have a name yet but already had a shape. Silas Crowe watched. He watched from the saloon's balcony and from the corner of the livery where smoke curled out. He watched from the shadow between the bank and the tailor's shop where gossip cooled in the shade. He had the patience of a bad season and the memory of a bookkeeper. He noticed the cup of coffee changing hands. He noticed the way James stood when Evelyn walked by, the small fraction of movement toward her, like a compass needle finding north. Silas believed in ownership of land, of fear, of people. He saw Evelyn and decided a future in which she did not belong to him was an insult he would not permit the valley to give. Dawn bled red and then white. By dusk, the light was a blade laid flat across the town. Evelyn finished her lessons, clapped erasers against the porch post, coughed chalk from her throat, and locked the door. She barely had time to turn before she felt the change in the air that means a different sort of weather is coming. Boots scuffed behind her. She pivoted. Silas stood in the street with 3 men at his back, all shadow and steel. His pistol gleamed. His eyes moved over her face and came away convinced. "You've got spirit, Miss Hart," he said, voice soft, in the way a snake's slide over sand is soft. "I like that. Tomorrow you'll stand beside me as my wife. You'll say the vows and save yourself the trouble, or I'll burn your school to the ground with every child inside. Choice is a civilized invention. I'm offering you one." She turned to run. Hands came down on her shoulders, hard as yokes. A gag stifled the shout in her throat. The world turned to canvas and darkness, then dust and speed, then fear. She thought absurdly of a spelling list of the small boy with a stubborn stutter who had finally found the courage to raise his hand. She thought of James at the forge and a single word trapped under the gag: help. James found the schoolhouse door standing open, lamplight, dead, the chalk broken on the floor. He shouted her name once, in a voice that did not sound like his, and heard only the echo of his own panic answer. A boy stumbled into the yard with breathless terror rattling in his chest. "Crowe." The canyon, he coughed, and James was already moving. He took the back way to his cabin and knelt beside the bed. The chest there had a scar across the lid. He knew where it came from, because he had made it on a day when anger needed to become something that was not a bruise. He lifted the lid and looked at the past like a man looks over a cliff before he decides whether to jump. The revolver lay inside with the belt coiled around it like a sleeping snake. He lifted both. The leather creaked when he drew it tight. He breathed and the air tasted of iron. Once more he said to the empty room. The canyon was a mouth in the earth, edged with torches that burned and guttered in the wind. Evelyn was tied to a post rope course against her wrists. Moonlight carved her cheekbones into thin wings. Silas circled her with an easy stride, the confidence of a man who believed he could take what he wanted and the law would turn its head because looking looked like trouble. "Tomorrow," he said, "the preacher will stand right there. We'll make it all clean. Your blacksmith friend," he smiled like a knife, "will be carrion for the buzzards. The desert forgets quickly." "I don't." Hoofbeats sounded like thunder traveling under the skin of the ground. James rode in fast enough that dust rose like a cloak around him. He dismounted before the horse came fully still. He walked forward like a man entering a church. He did not draw first. He did not need to. "Let her go, Crowe," he said. Silas's men laughed, relieved to be returned to a script they recognized. Guns came out safety, in numbers climbing into their hands. The first shot cracked the canyon in half. The second made time stutter. After that, there was no counting. Bullets had their own weather. They sliced past James's ears with a sound like a bee that meant him harm. They kicked gravel and snapped rope fibers and made sparks kiss rock. James moved like a man who had practiced not dying for a living. He stepped into the shadows where the torchlight didn't reach, drew men into the dark, and then didn't leave enough of them for the light to count. He shot with the precision of someone who remembers every wrong step he has ever taken and wants to ensure he does not take one now. Heat gathered at his temple. Blood slicked his sleeve where a graze had written a quick, hot line. He did not stop. A man rushed him, And James's elbow answered. A shot flowered splinters from the post inches from Evelyn's cheek, and she flinched, and then held still, because stillness sometimes saves more lives than running does. Torches fell and rolled, throwing light in new places that made the canyon look like a moving thing. Smoke thickened, and through it James saw Silas like a black thought in the corner of a mind. When it was down to a single man and a single idea, the canyon remembered how to be quiet. Silas stood with his pistol out. The sneer on his face faltered and returned. The men he brought lay in dark shapes on the ground. His eyes flicked from James to Evelyn and back. He lifted his chin because some men would rather die tall than live on their knees. "You should have stayed dead, Carter," he spat. "The valley would have been quieter." James's voice lost its echo and kept its iron. "I was dead," he said. "Until her." It is difficult to say afterward how long a duel lasts. For the men inside it, it takes a whole life. For the canyon, it takes the time a bat needs to bank around a torch and vanish. Two shots rode through the same piece of air and did not get along. When the smoke thinned, Silas Crowe lay in the dirt with his hand open, the revolver a foot away, as though even that would not touch him now. James let his own gun fall, not in ceremony but in exhaustion. He went to Evelyn with a speed that had nothing to do with his legs. He cut the rope, and when her arms came around him, he felt something in his chest that had been locked shut for years give way and open. Her tears soaked into his shirt and then into his skin and then into the place men mean when they say heart. "You came," she said into the space between his neck and his shoulder. "I'll always come." He answered, a promise that cost him nothing and everything. The canyon tried to decide what to do with the smoke. It lifted it an inch, and then set it back down. Then lifted it again, as if the night were breathing. James's pistol lay in the dust with his past attached to it by an invisible tether. The torches had burned low. In their light, the bodies were only shapes, and shape is kinder than detail. Evelyn pulled back and looked at him. Her face was streaked with dust and salt, and there were lines at the edges of her eyes that had not been there that morning. "What now, James?" she asked. He could have lied. He could have said, "We go home. We lock the door. We sleep. And when we wake, it will all be over." But James Carter had been alive long enough to know that men like Silas Crowe do not walk alone, and they do not leave a will that gives their property to the wind. "I killed Crowe," he said slowly, feeling the weight of each word to be sure it could bear itself. "But a man like him doesn't walk alone. He's got brothers somewhere. Allies. Folks worse than him who liked that he kept the town small and fearful. They'll hear Carter the Quick picked up a gun again. Some will come looking to see if the story is true. Some will come hoping to rewrite it with my blood." The torchlight found a scar and traced it. Evelyn shivered. She had seen his fury. She had seen him spend his strength like money he could afford to lose, and then when it was gone, reach down and find more. She had also seen him fix the hinge on a schoolhouse door with the patience of a man who intends things to last. In him were two truths that did not get along, and yet would have to share a roof. "We can leave Dust Valley," she said. The words trembled, but did not break. "We can start again." James shook his head. "Leaving doesn't erase what I've done," he said. "And it doesn't erase what I am to certain men. A rumor with a face. A story with a pulse. You can ride a long way out here and still find the same horizon. Somewhere far out, a coyote lifted its head and poured a single note into the sky. The sound traveled, grew thinner, then found the canyon, and slipped along its walls like a warning looking for a place to land. The night was not quiet. The West was never quiet. It just arranged its noises differently. James finally looked at her, and the look had something almost gentle in it, like the edge of a blade wrapped in cloth. "I'll protect you, Evelyn," he said, "as long as I draw breath. But the road ahead won't be kind." She lifted her chin the smallest degree, enough to align her eyes with his. Fear stood behind her and did not get to speak. "Then we'll face it together," she said. They stood in the hush after violence and before consequence, and the lantern sputtered like a small heart, uncertain whether to keep time. The canyon dimmed, and the dark stepped forward and closed around them with the intimacy of a blanket pulled up to the chin. The horse shifted and blew, finding them by smell. Somewhere above a bat drew a tight circle in the fringe of light, and vanished, its leather wings the only applause. They rode back slow. Dawn put a pale hand over the lip of the world. Dust Valley came into shape. First the line of roofs, then the road like a seam down the middle. Then the people who had slept and waking already knew what had happened. Because news in a small place travels on feet, it did not grow. Faces gathered in windows and doorways. Hands shaded eyes. A few men nodding not to James, but to a reality they could not pretend was something else. Mothers held children nearer without making a fuss of it. The preacher stood with his hat in both hands and did not say anything about forgiveness. The blacksmith's forge looked like a mouth that had been taught a song and forgotten it in the night. At the livery, the old hostler took the horse without comment and rubbed its nose. The animal leaned into the touch like a confession. Evelyn slid down from the saddle, stiffly found that her legs remembered the ground, and was surprised by gratitude for such a simple thing. James tied the reins to a post. His sleeve stuck to his arm, where blood had dried. The tailor's wife crossed the street with a pail and a cloth and said nothing while she set about washing the wound. James thanked her with his eyes because the rest of him was busy holding himself up. The schoolhouse door hung open the way he had found it, but now there were flowers on the step that no one would admit to having placed. Evelyn bent and gathered the broken chalk from the floor, aligning the pieces on the desk like a patient piecing together what can be saved. She set the rope fragments aside in a neat coil for the sheriff, because evidence looks less like chaos when it is arranged. By noon, the town looked busy on purpose, as towns do when they want to forget a thing, while it is still too hot to hold. Men hammered at nothing. Women scrubbed boards that were already clean. Children practiced their letters with ferocity. The saloon kept its doors open and poured drinks slower and quieter than usual. Silas's chair sat empty at the back, and the air around it kept its shape a while like heat above a road. No one sat in it, not even the brave or the foolish, because out here the difference is often thin. At dusk, the telegraph office sent a message east, and then one south, and then one farther than that. The operator did not write the words, he just made them move. Somewhere a man with the same last name as Silas read one of those messages and smiled a very small smile. Somewhere else, a pair of men with clean boots and the word agent in their mouths, but not always in their hearts, folded a newspaper over their breakfast and decided the West might need a visit. James knew none of this. He walked the perimeter of his small place and checked what could be checked: gate latch, window catch, the way the stairs had loosened under the run of their feet. He made a list for his hands to keep his mind from making one for his fear. He set a chair under the front window where he could see the road and the cottonwoods. He placed the revolver on the table beside him and looked at it the way a sober man looks at a bottle. Not with longing, not with hatred, but with the caution that comes of understanding. Evelyn braided her hair and then unbraided it because some part of her wanted to do and undo, until the world agreed to be different. She walked room to room and touched the things that anchored her: a book with her mother's name inked on the flyleaf. The bell the children rang. In the morning, the little tin cup someone had left on her desk once as payment, and then insisted she keep. She paused at the window and looked out at the cottonwoods moving against the sky. Their leaves, when the wind came, spoke in small voices. The sound calmed her the way a good hymn does, not because it promises ease, but because it honors endurance. Night rose. It rose slow at first, like a man standing from a chair after a hard day, then quick, as if reminded there was work to do. The stars snapped to their places. The moon threw a path across the road, and for a few long seconds, there was a shape on the ridge that could have been a rider or a stump or fear, deciding to put on a body. It did not move. James watched it until his eyes watered, and it became what it had always been, something he could not name. Evelyn came to the doorway wrapped in a shawl and stood by his chair. "Will they come?" she asked. "Someone will," he said. "Not the cruelty of certainty, but the kindness of truth. We'll meet them," she said. He took her hand. It lay in his palm with the weight of necessity. He squeezed and felt her answer with a pressure that steadied him. The revolver on the table did not turn to ash. The road did not vanish. But for a moment the house felt as if it had grown deeper foundations while they weren't looking. Outside, the cottonwoods continued their unremarkable work, leaning into the wind and back surviving. In the schoolhouse, a slate still held the last letter a child had written before the door had flown inward. S tucked tight and small, as if it had been afraid to take up space. In the saloon, a chair stayed empty and taught men a lesson about absence that they would forget in the morning. In the telegraph office, the operator cleaned his keys and told himself he did not write the words he had sent. In a town 2 days' ride away, a man who shared Silas's blood unreadably watched the night and planned the shape of his anger. The lantern wick lowered itself without being asked. The house grew a little darker, a little closer, as houses do when they are asked to keep watch. James shut his eyes and listened to the sounds that meant safe. Evelyn's breathing, the soft shift of wood as it cooled, the complaint of a cricket past its bedtime. He counted them like a man counts coins to be sure he can pay what is owed. When he opened his eyes, the road still lay where he had left it, and the moon now lit the cottonwoods from a different side, and the shape on the ridge had gone, or else had never been. He did not sleep much. Men who have seen death wear sleep like a coat they shrug on and off in doorways. When he did doze, it was to the clink of his own memory and the smell of hot metal. He dreamed of a place where the sound of a gun could not climb the walls and get in, and he knew better than to believe in it out loud. He woke to the first gray smear of morning and the hush of a town holding its breath before choosing what to be that day. Evelyn woke with him because people who lived together learn one another's hours without trying. She made coffee and set it beside his hand and did not make him say thank you because last night had already said enough. Together they stood at the window and watched the road like a line in a story. Down it came, a rider hat, low dust rising. Then another. The second wore a coat too fine for this place. The first saddle creaked like leather that did not intend to work long. They passed the saloon, and the men on the porch made themselves small in their chairs, which is a trick men learn when they suspect that being seen might cost. James lifted the revolver and checked the cylinder with a care that was not dramatics. Evelyn set her hand on his wrist for 1 second, just one, to say, "I'm here, and do not rush." He nodded. She let go. The riders didn't turn in at the house. They went on past, slow, taking stock of distances, of lines of sight, of the way the cottonwoods cast their shade. They did not look toward the schoolhouse, but their eyes saw it all the same. The first lifted a hand in a small salute to no one. The second smiled, like a promise. Dust rose and settled behind them, leaving the air full of what a person might choose to say later. Perhaps they were only passing through. Perhaps we imagined it. Perhaps peace is an option after all. The morning's chill admitted it did not know. James set the revolver back down. He stood. He stretched the stiffness from his shoulders and went to stoke the stove, because whether or not a war waits outside, a fire still needs tending. Evelyn tied back her hair and lifted the bell rope at the schoolhouse door and rang it once clear. The sound crossed the yard and hopped the road and climbed the porch steps of the saloon and slid under the telegraph office door. Children came at a run, hair wild, faces open. Some of them looked over their shoulders to see whether the men on horseback had returned. They hadn't. Not yet. Class began. The alphabet lined up for roll call. Evelyn's chalk wrote in a steady hand. She looked up once and caught James's eye through the open window the way a ship might catch the brief flash of a lighthouse between waves, and felt her heartbeat steady to the rhythm of a thing meant to continue. Outside, the cottonwoods lifted and lowered their leaves like hands in a crowd that hadn't decided whether to cheer or to warn. Dust Valley went on with its afternoon. That is how places like this survive, by making choice after small choice to go on. It was not a happy ending. It was not an ending at all. It was a road that did not guarantee safety, but did guarantee itself stretching forward under a sky big enough to hold grief and hope at once. Out past the ridge, the riders circled to talk without being overheard. Somewhere south, a train carried a man reading a telegram with Silas's name in it. Somewhere east, a lawyer with an empty conscience folded a letter and slid it into his pocket. Somewhere north, a storm built on the spine of the mountains and practiced the low song wind sings when it plans to travel far. Evening would come as it always does. The lantern would sputter then steady. James would bolt the door and set the chair in its place. Evelyn would close the book where a child had finally written the letter S with a daring flourish at the end. The cottonwoods would whisper in their old language, and beyond the last fence post in that strip of country where facts become stories and stories become law, something would move toward Dust Valley with the patience of weather. If your heart beats for love and survival on the frontier, if you understand that some promises are kept in the quiet between storms, then stay close. The road ahead won't be kind, but we'll ride it together,